Hello, I'm Shaughnessy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the road conditions on South University Center Drive here in Las Vegas, Nevada, um, which is right next to the Thomas and Mack and the UNLV food pantry. So this is a pretty busy location. Anyways, so some of the existing conditions that are barriers. So barriers are basically considered things that might really be hindrance to day-to-day walking, especially for pedestrians and even drivers. So mainly on the street, the unsafe locations, the unkept buildings, the busier street, and the cracked and dirty sidewalks are, I believe, to be the main barriers um, of this street. So some existing conditions that are facilitators that I think are really good, and that maybe with that we could maybe really help build on in the community. So, for example, large crosswalks to cross the street, um, which is really good for people that are crossing the street, gives them enough space, lights, especially when it gets dark, so people could see where they're going. Transportation stops. I think that's really good, especially if people need to get place to place and they don't have a car with them, um, or another transportation, and noticeable signs for directions for both the pedestrian vehicles, which I think is a really good thing. But I think that could be definitely improved, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Some recommendations with that. I believe that widening the sidewalk will help. Again, create more space, more comfortability for walking. Fixing the cracked sidewalks. I think that with this, many people will feel a little bit safer walking, knowing that they're not going to get hurt, bruised, or even trip, especially elderly and young children, are big things to really worry about, because one little fall could really turn into something bad, especially if not addressed. Fixing certain buildings and also lights. I definitely think just really updating some of the buildings and just some of the curb appeal, and just making it a little bit more visually intriguing and interesting. I think cleaning the sidewalks and streets are huge too. I notice that there's a lot of trash and even like graffiti and litter, which just isn't really pleasant. No one wants to walk in filth. I don't want to walk in someone else's filth. I'm sure someone else doesn't want to walk in my filth, vice versa. Bike lanes, I think, would be pretty amazing. I think that people could really get from point A to point B. The one thing, though, is it's a very busy street. But with that being said, I think that it might really cause drivers to slow down a little bit and really realize that there's other people on the road, not just them. And chicanes, I think that it might be very nice to add a little bit more curvature, and also just greenery, and a little bit more aspects on that. Speed humps too, I think, are great. I think that even just adding even one or two could really wake up some drivers and really just really make them stop and notice what's going on the road, especially because I noticed that the road is flat when I looked at it. Update and add more signage. I definitely think that that would be a really great thing. I think that they've been doing pretty good on the signs, but I think that even just making them a little bit bigger, or just adding a few more signs would be really great. And yeah, so adding more security and more security cameras if there is not more, because I'm sure there has to be a few, especially around the buildings of a few of the places. But it is a very scary, sketchy area. It's kind of scary. There's a lot of homeless around. So I think just people feeling safe, and I think that even just adding some more, especially even if there's accidents, people can really go back, and really look at the evidence in the footage, which I think is huge. And some cost approximations, some are going to be high and some are a little bit lower. So the concrete walkway / filling the concrete sidewalks, It's about 1,800 per 200 square feet, which really adds up. The bike lanes too are a lot, especially per mile, about 50,000 per mile, or between 10 to 50,000. So 50,000, 100, the highest. But again, that this is a very rough estimate of data that I found and saw. Some chicanes, they could be kind of cheap to kind of expensive. I mean, from 700,000 to 1,400,000. I mean, sorry, 7,000. But what's interesting is that I noticed that the asphalt is a little bit cheaper. It's about 8,000. So it's very interesting noticing the differences. So maybe create more chicanes on more of the asphalt instead of the concrete. But with that, there are some nice architecture, or there is some space and gravel way on the street. Hopefully you'll see some pictures coming up in just a second. But with that, even just adding some more plants, I think would be amazing. But speed humps are about 2,000 per hump, which is actually on a cheaper end. But again, you know, with this, you're thinking of adding like 3, even maybe 4, which will end up being like what, for like $8,000 maybe, maybe even more, maybe 10, $100,000. So I mean, we're thinking of a lot of money here. Surveillance cameras, it could be anywhere from like $80 to $200, even more probably, given the size of the camera, the quality. I mean, there's just so much stuff to think about. And updating signage and adding signages, apparently could be anywhere from like 150 to above, even maybe less, depending on maybe parts and pieces to replace or to add. So yeah, again, some of these are estimates, some of these aren't directly the exact cost. Just want to really clarify that. So some of the main priorities that I believe are the high surveillance cameras. Again, safety is a huge issue. And again, fix cracked sidewalks. I feel like you could just see some of the cracks. It's just it's a profound hazard. It really is. You don't think it is, but when you're walking and even like riding a bike or even a scooter, one little bump can really throw you off, and it could really affect you, especially if you land on the asphalt. Again, clean sidewalks I think are really important. No one wants to walk in filth again. I think that's definitely a huge aspect too. So some things that are important but maybe not as important, so more in the medium category, would be adding some bike lanes. I think that even just adding a little bit more space or even widening the sidewalks enough to create more space for people to comfortably ride their bikes, because at this point there's not enough space for someone to walk and someone to ride their bike directly at the same time without basically almost crashing into each other, especially because the poles also take up a lot of space. So that is something I want to implement. As you can see here how big the poles are. And also just refreshing the sidewalk. Right here, you could tell it's just very run down and dirty, and just you could tell the Vegas heat really took a hit. And again, this is kind of rundown area too, so I think with that, like, it can make a difference for a driver to really see exactly where the pedestrian lines are, pedestrian crosswalks are, and I think that creates a lot more safety. Chicanes I think are pretty important, but not as important, so these are kind of lower. And also, again, adding some signages. Again, we have some signage, so I don't think it's huge, but I think that maybe implementing more signage more specific toward like maybe the speed limits, because I know the cars go pretty fast here. So I think maybe just really implementing some other important basic factors like speed, and maybe even making the crosswalks sign a little bit bigger. So yeah, especially the pedestrian crossing sign, just even visually bigger so people really see that would just make a big difference. So how could I assess this plan? What are some ways that I could make sure that these rules and these ideas are really implemented and successful on the street? So first, I would consider feedback from the people who or locally from the area who live in the area, or also companies, including local businesses as well, and ask them to fill out a pre and post evaluation of the changes of the street, and then personally walk on the street before and after the changes have been made to see my personal response. And I would do this to help maybe avoid some biases and really try to understand what maybe some of the people are saying before making some assumptions. And then also during that, I would want to ask some people that are walking at the moment what they think, and their opinions and thoughts. And then also measuring the rate of pedestrian accidents before and after the injuries, linked through the evaluators and through medical data that is provided. But again, this is a little tricky due to the HIPAA law, because there's only so much information that doctors and providers could distribute. But even just the simplest data could really make a difference. And I think that it could really help figure out how successful this is. And if not, there's so many other ways. And these are just a few we're excited. But anyways, thank you so much. And yeah.